we're going to talk about market dynamics in Europe with my colleague Addison Shanlin from AirInsight and our guests from AvBench, Antoine Chareau and Hugo Binard. Thanks for being with us this morning. Let me get to the next slide, please, Addison. Today's agenda is to talk about the market dynamics in Europe. We'll look at some key market metrics with AvBench. Addison will take us over some of the fleet status, and then monitoring of airline competition and case studies. AvBench has some interesting and unique metrics that they'll explain to us, and then we'll go into a Q&A session afterwards, and we'll try to leave a few minutes for Q&A. If you have questions during the session, please message me with your questions so you don't forget, and we'll go through those at the end of the webinar. Our guests, Antoine Chareau and Hugo, are both ex-Bombardier. Antoine also worked for CFM International. These were the guys that were doing the analysis of markets for the what's now the A220 and was the C series as well as the CRJ, and have a wealth of experience in analytics and looking at data. After the acquisition by Mitsubishi and their abandonment of the MRJ program, they decided to look at the handwriting on the wall and said, we'd better do something different, and founded AvBench, and here we are today. As a ground rule for today's presentation, we asked that we look at the last 12 months in Europe with data and analytics and draw some conclusions on that. Although the data that both companies have goes multiple decades in the past, so from a historical perspective, we're limiting some of the insights just to give you a flavor of what might be available, and some interesting conclusions as to what might happen. So with that, I will turn it over to Antoine. Addison, if you could give us the next slide, Antoine will begin the process.
Oh, we can start that slide. Thank you, Ernie. Thank you, Addison. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hugo and I are very pleased to co-host this webinar with you. I guess we share the same passion for data, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I hope that what we will share during this webinar will complement what you and actually others in the industry are analyzing. Maybe collectively, we can better understand where our industry is heading. So at AvBench with Hugo, we won't claim to understand everything we see. Our industry is quite complex, but we believe there is value in discussing not just the product, but also how airlines grow the network. It's actually often challenging to assess if they're doing so efficiently, especially since airlines obviously are unlikely to openly share their weaknesses and struggles. Now, airlines cannot hide their airplanes, as we all know, and there's a lot we can extract from the data now available. So before diving in, let me say maybe a few words on the data that we use, especially for traffic and revenue. We work with a company called Milanamos. They're based in France. They've been leveraging machine learning techniques and artificial intelligence for quite some time now. Their data goes back to 2002. They're pulling from over 380 sources, so including MIDT, ARC traffic data, IATA, BSP data, GDS data, OAG schedules, airport, airline association, civil organization, and so on. So I think, I mean, today they can now reflect basically the traffic and revenue performance of airlines around the world. Are they 100% bulletproof? Maybe not, but it is certainly accurate enough for what we need. And I strongly believe that what we will share with you today align very closely with what you hear from airlines behind closed doors. Maybe next slide, Addison. So as we said, we will start with a few key market metrics. And obviously, we'll start with the passenger volume. Obviously, we're looking at the past 6 years, so 2017, 2023, and looking at how the market has evolved over time. Europe, and I will start with that. Europe, in our presentation, is actually the European Union countries plus the UK plus Switzerland. Is it really Europe? It's the Europe that we decided to look at today. Obviously, we can customize it if need be. And when we're talking about the European domestic market, we're actually looking at the sum of the domestic routes, so within each country, but also intra-European routes. So as you can see on the left, this market represent roughly, or in 2023, it was basically more than 525 million passengers, which is actually the size of the number of inhabitants in that region. So it's an interesting ratio, 1-for-1, basically, and obviously much bigger market than other international markets. But here today, we will also be looking at the transatlantic market and also the Europe-Asia market as examples. And as you can see, the recovery has not been at the same pace everywhere. Transatlantic market was obviously ahead. But basically in 2024, most traffic flows will see passenger volumes exceeding 2019 levels. And maybe one last comment, maybe because we're talking about the European domestic market in terms of size. So I was talking about the 526. I will often maybe compare the European market with the US market because we also have this as a reference sometimes. Last year in 2023, the US domestic market was basically 625 million passengers for a population of 330-ish million people. So obviously, it's not the same dynamic between the US or Europe. You can go to next slide, Edison. So a few metrics, if we look at where the passengers are flying in Europe. So most of them, 65% of them are flying within Europe, so domestic flights, and 35% of them fly international, so outside Europe. Now, if we look at the ticket revenue from a ticket revenue standpoint, most of the revenue is coming from international flights. Looking at Q1 here, we're looking at Q1 stats. This represents earlier this year 100 million domestic passengers versus in the US it would be 140 million domestic passengers. The way the network is structured today, so we see the average stage length is 575 nautical miles, which is fairly short compared to other regions in the world, the population being quite concentrated in Europe. If you compare with the US, for instance, as you can see, it's much the average stage length is greater, so 790 nautical miles in the US. If we look at the average fares, it's $155, so it's in progression since last year, but it's still well below what we see in the US. If you were to put it for the same distance, basically fares in Europe are 20% cheaper than what we see in the US, so for the same distance. And this can be explained by the fact that there are a lot of LCCs and the competition with the train and cars in Europe. The way the network is structured, as you can see, you have the number of routes, domestic routes within Europe, so 3,200 routes. This is well above what we see in the US. In the US, it's actually around 2,900 domestic routes, but that number is shrinking. So there are actually less routes within Europe, while for the international markets, actually, that network is growing. So as you can see, versus last year, we've had the opening of more than 170 routes international. From a capacity standpoint, capacity is increasing both at domestic and international level. Domestic, whether we look at from a seat standpoint or ASK standpoint, it's at plus 8% over the past 12 months, to be compared with a plus 3% in the US. So Europe is really catching up now in terms of capacity, and international, it's even more than that, so 18%. ASK is plus 20%, so not only airlines are adding capacity, but they're actually also flying further. Next slide, please. And maybe a good way to illustrate the airline landscape in Europe is to look at that breakdown, I mean, between low-cost carriers, so who are yellow, orange here on this picture, and the network carriers who are in blue. As you can see, whether you look at it from a passenger volume standpoint or from a ticket revenue standpoint, low costs have the largest share. From a passenger volume, they're actually up to 63% of the passengers are flying with low-cost airlines within Europe. Even from a ticket revenue standpoint, low cost are actually now making even more money than the network carriers altogether. from a ticket revenue standpoint. If you were to do the same exercise, for instance, with the US actually network carriers have the largest share, whether it's from a passenger volume standpoint or a ticket revenue standpoint. We can go next slide, Edison.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here quickly with a fleet status. We break this fleet status here into 3: regional, narrow body, wide body. In terms of the regional, firstly, Europe is now going greener and does not really like regional flying anymore. But in the regional market, what we see here is a duopoly, which is effectively a monopoly. ATR is the only turboprop maker still in the business. Embraer is the only regional jet maker in the business. But you can see, relatively speaking, how the size of each of these circles reflects the fleet size. The big one, obviously, is narrow body. Airbus is very far ahead in the European market. And what we want to point out here is the size of the used market. There is a crying shortage of new deliveries, which everybody's familiar with. And so, like airlines everywhere in the world, people are scrambling for lift, and they are picking up second-hand airplanes where they can. By the way, although Boeing is small, bear in mind, Ryanair is their big customer, and Ryanair is a very big customer. So for Boeing, Boeing's strength is having that big customer. In terms of the wide body, we see something unusual. Always to date, wide bodies have been the strength of Boeing. But in the European situation, we see Airbus is by far the stronger player in the wide body market. And you can see again the relative size of this wide body market is close to the regional, and this is the size of the narrow body. I'll go to the next slide.
Okay, so monitoring of airline competition. So now we will be looking at the competition between airlines in Europe for the domestic market. If you go next slide, Addison. So the first metric we're going to look at is trying to look at the capacity and how that capacity has been deployed in Europe over the past 12 months. So what you see here is we're looking at how much capacity has been deployed over the past 12 months and how that capacity has been deployed on new routes. So the y-axis is showing you the capacity growth. The x-axis is showing you how that capacity has been deployed on new routes. We would have done that same exercise a year ago. You would have seen that LCCs were the first one to add a lot of capacity, so post-COVID. Today, they've been slowing down, obviously. So that's why you see the numbers for Ryanair, EasyJet, or Wizz Air, like more in the 10%-ish range, but it was much higher a few months ago. Now it's actually the network carriers who are catching up. So as you can see on the left side, all the network carriers have been adding a lot of capacity in the past 12 months. Now, some of them have been also deploying that new capacity on new routes. I mean, AGN is one of them, but you can also see Swiss being also a bit aggressive from a network standpoint. I don't think it's a surprise to see ITA at the top, as this is really the rebirth of Alitalia, and ITA is obviously rebuilding the network. On the low-cost front, the ones who are maybe shaking up a bit the system, I mean, Volotea, they're still small. It's a small bubble, so they would not even be on the scale here. So we had to, I mean, they're outside of the scale, but they're basically growing and growing the network. Same with Wizz Air. So the Wizz Air we're looking at here is really the full group. So W6, W9, W4. And obviously, they are not only growing the network, but they're actually also introducing new routes. Yes, so that's from a network standpoint. So now we can go to the next slide. What we're going to show you here is basically the revenue performance and the capacity performance, so the cost performance, because actually we'll be looking at the capacity right sizing. So I'll start with the left side. So what we're looking here is we're looking at the network carriers, and we'll see whether the revenue performance is coming from the fact that there are more passengers flying, or if it's also driven by the fact that the ticket fares have been going up. So what you see on the left is the x-axis is showing you passenger volume evolution going up when you go to the right direction, and the y-axis is showing you the average ticket fare, so going up. And the green dotted line is basically showing you the ISO revenue curve. So most airlines in Europe have been improving their revenue in the past 12 months. Now, some more than others, as you can see. But clearly, Iberia, ITA, Lufthansa, for instance, or Austrian, have been among the ones who've been basically able to extract the most in terms of revenue versus others. Clearly, Air France is a bit behind, and they could have maybe done a better job from a revenue standpoint. If we look at the capacity right sizing now, so which is in a way how airlines have been disciplined in the way they've been introducing additional capacity. This is obviously their cost structure. Here again, you will see the green dotted line representing the ISO load factors. And so as they've been introducing more capacity, the question is, have they been able to capture more passenger volume? So now the x-axis is so reflecting that capacity evolution, but watch out, it's going up when you go left. So the capacity evolution is going up when you go left. This is just to have on both slides, basically the best performers on the top right. And then you see also the passenger volume evolution on the y-axis going up. So basically, if you go up, you're increasing your load factor. If you're going down, you're basically downgrading your load factor, which was the case. So for instance, for ITA, Swiss, SAS, ITA, again, not necessarily a surprise. I mean, they have to add a lot of capacity, and then obviously the passenger may catch up at some point, but they've been degrading the load factors over the past 12 months. Maybe a bit more disappointing what we see at SAS, TAP, but also Air France. In a way, Air France, from a capacity standpoint, they've actually been reducing their capacity within Europe. Again, we're just looking at Europe domestic market. It doesn't mean that it's the case for the full network, but in Europe, it was a case, and they've been actually also degrading their load factors. So overall, if we were to combine both views, again, the revenue performance on the left side and the cost performance on the right side, we would say that AGN, Iberia, Lufthansa have put themselves in a strong position, while maybe Air France or SAS have been a bit lagging behind in the past 12 months. You can go next slide, Alison. Now we'll do basically the same, looking at the low-cost carriers. So same slide. So on the left side, we see the revenue performance. And not a surprise, I'm sure that you see that basically all the low cost have been improving their revenue because the fares have been going up. But actually, some players like EasyJet, as you can see, have not necessarily improved or increased their ticket fares. But that was a way maybe for them to increase their passenger volume. But in general, as you can see, they've all been able to improve their revenue volumes in the past 12 months. On the right side, now the question is, have they been able to remain disciplined from a capacity standpoint? And so, as you can see, most of them have been very disciplined and able to maintain their load factors, if not improving the load factors, maybe with an exception. But again, I would not blame Vueling. I mean, they're slightly behind, but it's nothing to be worried about. But here we could say Vueling is maybe a different story because, as you know, the role that Vueling is playing within the IAG group, so with BA and Iberia, it's more of a defensive tool. I mean, Vueling is deployed to make sure that basically the other LCCs don't represent too much of a threat for BA and Iberia and their network, and so they play with it in a different way. But overall, I would say for the low cost, Wizz Air, Ryanair, and Volotea, which is still a small player, have shown very interesting performance in the past 12 months, and Vueling is maybe a bit behind. We can go to the next slide, Alison. The last picture that we want to share with you is now the market share evolution. And when we look at market share evolution, we will look at both the passenger volume market share evolution and the ticket revenue market share evolution. So the picture you see on the left is the same as we showed you earlier, but we're just looking here at the passenger volume. So just to show you that in Europe, for the domestic market, basically Ryanair, EasyJet, Vueling, Wizz Air are the key players. Obviously, the size of the bubbles on the right are representing the size of each player, but now we're mixing everybody. So low-cost airlines and the network carriers. As you can see, where you want to be is at the top right again, because the top right means that you're increasing your passenger volume market share, but also at the same time, you're able to grow your ticket revenue market share. So Wizz Air is definitely in a strong position. Same for Ryanair, but also among the majors, Iberia and Lufthansa have done a very good job to improve the position on the domestic market. EasyJet is a different story. So we saw earlier EasyJet was not improving. They've not increased their fares, probably on purpose, but so they've lost from a ticket revenue market share standpoint. And that was maybe a way for them to be able to gain passenger volume market share over their competitors. The ones that are a bit more of a concern is obviously when you're at the bottom left, such as Air France, Vueling, and BA. Here, it's a position where you don't want to be in because you're not only losing passenger volume market share, but you're also losing ticket revenue market share. As I said earlier, Vueling may be a different case because that may be on purpose. You cannot just look at Vueling on its own. It's also interesting to look at it with the rest of the IAG group. But still, Vueling has been maybe a bit behind from that standpoint. So if we go to the next slide, this is kind of a summary slide, looking at all these metrics all together side by side. So we're looking at whether we look at it from a network standpoint, from a yield extraction standpoint, from a capacity right-sizing standpoint, or from a market share standpoint, you'll see some names coming back. So for the network carriers, if you look at the names at the end, Lufthansa, Iberia are always in a strong position, no matter which metric you're looking at. For the Air France or SAS are maybe the ones who've been lagging a bit behind for the network carriers. And for the low cost, you will see that the name of Wizz Air and Ryanair, again, not a surprise, have been really driving the growth for the LCCs. Vueling and maybe also EasyJet is kind of a bit of a surprise, but they've been a bit more behind. They could have maybe done a better job. Again, at the end, I would say for them, they're still in good position, but again, everything being relative, it's a bit behind what Wizz Air and Ryanair have done. So this is for the European domestic market. We'll go next, Addison, next slide, and share with you maybe the other two examples of international markets. And so focus today on the transatlantic market and the Europe-Asia flow. So we'll start with the transatlantic market, and you can go next, Addison. Thank you. So here again, and I won't go through all the different metrics, but obviously this is something that we can share with you if you need. We're showing here the passenger volume market share. So in blue, you have the North American players, and in green, the European players. As you can see, it's pretty well balanced between the two. The biggest players being more the Americans, but also BA is a strong player on the transatlantic. Now, if we look at the evolution of that market share in the past 12 months, and again, we want to be on the top right, so increasing your passenger volume market share, but also your ticket revenue market share. Lufthansa, United together have been very aggressive, and they've been basically improving their footprint on the transatlantic. Same for American and Iberia. Quite disappointing to see that BA was really behind, so they've not been able to leverage as much as others that recovery on the transatlantic. And we could say a bit the same for Air France and Delta, who have basically reduced their footprint on the transatlantic market over the past 12 months. If we do so, similar exercise now for the Europe-Asia market. So that's the next slide. So now, again, you see on the left the current breakdown between airlines from a passenger volume standpoint. Now you have 50 shades of red here, representing all the non-European airlines. European airlines are in blue. So as you can see, most of the passengers are actually flying with non-European airlines, with Emirates, Qatar being at the top. Both of them are actually the major players on this traffic flow. Now, if we look on the right side and what's happening, what's the dynamic? First, I mean, the Chinese, which is not a surprise that the Chinese market coming back. I mean, Air China and China Eastern, as you can see, are really gaining a lot of passenger, maybe not as much as the ticket revenue, but they're basically improving the passenger market share. But also Qatar, Etihad, and Turkish are actually the ones who've been improving their market share, while Emirates, for instance, which is today and remains the major player on that traffic flow, they actually have been maybe a bit behind and really losing ground to their competition on that Europe-Asia market flow. So quite disappointing for Emirates. Again, this is a very dynamic picture. If we look at it in 6 months or in 12 months from now, it will be interesting to see how this evolves over time. If we go next, and as you we will again summarize, even though I know we've not shared the first metrics, but you will see here the names of the key airlines for each metric, whether we look at network aggressiveness, yield extraction, capacity right sizing, or market share. A name that comes back often is, again, Lufthansa. Whether you're looking at the transatlantic market or the Europe-Asia traffic flow, Lufthansa has really improved their positioning in the past 12 months. Iberia as well, especially on the transatlantic front. Even though Turkish is maybe not part of the Europe that we define, I mean, it remains very close to Europe, and I would say Turkey is really the one that we need to watch in the next few months. The performance is quite interesting at all levels, as you can see, whether it's from a revenue standpoint, capacity right sizing. They've been doing a very good job in the past 12 months. Among the airlines who have been lagging behind, as we showed earlier, BA, but also Air France have probably been a bit disappointing in the past 12 months on the transatlantic. And one now for the Europe-Asia, maybe there are not so many European carriers because, as you saw, they are not necessarily the major players. But one of them has been actually impacted a lot, and we know why. I mean, it's Finnair, with what's happening in Ukraine. Obviously, the fact that they could no longer fly over Russia was a big challenge for them. But again, you have the list here of the airlines, the market leaders, and the ones who've been a bit behind. Now, if we go next, what we want to share in the next 10 minutes is basically to show you a few case studies. I mean, we were looking at the global view first. Now we're just narrowing down a bit the view and try to go down to specific airline and specific sub-fleets to see how they've been performing over the past 12 months. So the way we do that, and we can go next if you want, Addison. The way we do that, we have at AvBench a methodology. We have an index that we call the COFFEE, so which stands for Commercial and Operational Fit Index. So this is actually an index that will combine all the performance that we saw before. So we look at the passenger market share, we look at the revenue market share, the level of competition an airline is facing on a specific network. We'll look at the yield performance, we'll look at the cost per seat performance, we look at the aircraft utilization, and so on. And so based on all this, we come up with an overall score that will reflect the performance of that asset on a scale between 0 and 10. And 5 being basically when you're in line with the industry standards, because everything being relative, then the question is your aircraft doing a better job than the rest of the competition? So if you're close to 10, like we see here for these examples, it means that basically you've been able to extract as much as you could with that asset on your network. And so you're doing a very good job with that asset. So here are just 4 examples, and I can go through them one by one. So if we look, for instance, at the 320neo at Iberia, basically on their network where they deploy the aircraft, I mean, they have a CASM, an operational CASM that is 8% lower than their competition. The passenger market share has been growing above 4% per year on their network for the past 12 years. And the level of competition has been declining. So basically the competition is going away. So this is a perfect situation you want to be in. So clearly it's a big success, the 320neo at Iberia. Same with the 321neo at Wizz Air, as they have already 48 of them in service. A lot coming that are on order today. Again, as you can see, the average revenue market share is above 4% per year on the 321 network, so even better than what they see on the rest of the network, so with the 320. The operational CASM of Wizz Air's A321neo is 15% lower than their competitors. Actually, there is no one who can offer a lower cost per seat than them on their network. So clearly a strong tool for them. On the wide-body front, we chose the 787 at Lufthansa. As you know, they've been introducing them recently. Again, this is a big success. I mean, we see what they've been able to do with the 787 is quite impressive. The CASM of the 787-9 is 25% lower than their competition on their network. And the ideal situation is that actually they're not facing so much competition where they're putting it. So they have actually 23% of the routes are in monopoly, and only 20% of their routes facing multiple competitors. So this is working well. So there is a lot of potential for the 787-9 at Lufthansa. Ryanair, I'm sure it's not a surprise for you guys, but as we said, the MAX is working pretty well for them. They have quite not unique strategy, but as you know, they put also the airplane on many monopolistic routes. So more than 30% of the network is made of monopolistic routes, and only 40% where they're facing multiple competitors. The CASM that they offer with the MAX 8 is 13% lower than the competitors, and both the passenger and revenue market share have been increasing by 1.6% per year on average in the past 4 years. So these are a few examples of aircraft type that have been really successful in the past 12 months. Now, if we go in the next slide, maybe these examples are more the ones that are a bit disappointing, if not maybe concerning for some of them. So as you can see, for Neo or MAX aircraft or even a 787, you would expect actually these aircraft to have a performance above 5 because, I mean, clearly, I mean, they should bring something different to the previous generation. And I can start with SAS with the 320 Neo. They already have a significant fleet, but when we look at their revenue and passenger market share performance over the past 4 years, so since 2020, it's been declining by more than 3% per year. So that's a lot. So basically, the footprint is shrinking on the network. The network growth potential is quite limited out of their main bases, and the yields are maybe not where they should be for an airline offering premium services. So I'm not saying this will stay like this forever. I mean, this will evolve over time, but today, maybe, I mean, the 320 Neo at SAS needs to still improve its footprint, or at least to stabilize so that it doesn't get worse. Air France, we were talking about the 787 at Lufthansa. The 787 at Air France, for instance, is not the same story. They have 10 of them, as you know. They've bought more 350 instead of 787, and maybe here we have the explanation. I mean, where they've been putting the 787-9, the revenue market share has been declining by more than 6% in the past 4 years. The operational CASM of the Air France 787 and its network is 5% higher than its competitors. There is actually a limited growth potential with only 17% of the network made of monopolistic routes versus the 350, for instance, 900, where more than 40% of the routes are in monopoly. So not really a surprise with them going with more 350 than the 787-9 at Air France. The 321 Neo at TAP, when we look at the COFI score, it's quite disappointing. But this could be explained by the fact that first, when it's deployed on European routes, they're facing a lot of LCCs, which is not easy for them. This is forcing them to lower the yields. Not necessarily a situation you want to be in. But their revenue market share has been impacted quite significantly over the past 4 years. They are also putting them on transatlantic. Now, this could be, and again, I'm not saying, I don't know about the strategy. I mean, this could be on purpose for TAP, but this could be a road opener as well for the 330-900, which is actually performing very well. So not everything is bad at TAP. And again, you cannot necessarily look at an aircraft type on its own. Here, it may be working side by side with the 330-900, because actually the 330-900 at TAP is doing a very good job. But the 321 is suffering. So I don't think it can last like this forever. So again, an interesting case to watch in the coming months and quarters. Last, Iceland Air. Very disappointing here. I would say the MAX 8 that they have, so they have 15 of them. If we look at the operational CASM of Iceland Air 737-8, so is 9% higher than their competitors on its network. Both revenue and passenger market share have been declining by more than 9% per year on average in the past 4 years. So that's huge. And there's a very limited network and growth potential. So clearly, it was not the right answer to replace the 757s. As you know, they are actually taking other aircraft to do that job. But there was maybe a move that was a bit too fast. The platform was probably not the right platform for them and what they need. Again, you may have a great tool. It all depends on what the competition is putting in front of you. And that's what we're looking with COFI, is that a platform on its own doesn't say much. You need to look at what the other guys are putting in front of you. And sometimes may not have the right tool. These are just a few examples. Yes, you can go next, Edison. And this will be my last slide. I mean, we can obviously provide you with more case studies. We have different tools at AvBench. So we have the Eagle Eye tool, which is looking at many metrics to have a better understanding at regional level or by aircraft type or by airline category of what's happening in the marketplace and how performance compare between the different players. We have the coffee, as I said, so we can really deep dive and analyze the value of an aircraft type and its stickiness to a particular airline. So going through many metrics and trying to understand the performance of that specific asset. And then we have what we call Monaco, so monitoring of airline competition, where we will try to analyze the game between airlines, as we showed you earlier, from a market share standpoint, from a yield extraction standpoint, a capacity right sizing, all these metrics to really understand the winners and the ones that are a bit behind. If you need more, we're showing you here our contact details, so feel free to reach out to Hugo or myself, Antoine at avbench.com, or Hugo at avbench.com, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Over to you, Edison.
Thank you, Antoine and Hugo. Here is some information on AirInsight and how to reach us if you have questions. If you would like a copy of the presentation today, please email me, ashonland@AirInsight. There's a link here to some of the stuff we do. As Antoine mentioned, we are also data geeks. We love data. So we'd like to now go to Q&A. For those of you who have Q&A, please use the chat if you have any questions.
Let me start with one, Addison, and it's for Antoine quickly. What surprised you when you first looked at these data on the European markets?
Well, maybe as I said earlier, that the picture for the Europe-Asia flow, I think we see everywhere that Asia is booming. There's a lot of growth potential, and as I showed you, European airlines are not necessarily well positioned in that market today. So I was a bit surprised to see that proportionally, European airlines have not been more aggressive on that front. As I said, I was also, impressed with Lufthansa because I think we know in the past 12 months, the Mediterranean countries have been benefiting a lot from the post-COVID effects. I mean, there was a lot of market growth in Spain, Italy, Greece, and we know, and we could see Aegean or Iberia benefiting from that. But Lufthansa has actually also been able to leverage that much more than Air France and BA, for instance. So clearly, Lufthansa has been pretty aggressive. So that was interesting for me to see.
We have a question from one of the guests, Savvy Scythe. She says, in the analysis, does looking back 12 months disadvantage those that restored capacity faster relative to those that might be catching up now?
True. So that's why we're showing a 12-month picture. We could actually do the same exercise and compare with 24-month picture, or we just compare with 2019. So again, this is a movie, but at least we wanted to share with you what happened in the past 12 months. And that's why we think we need to keep in mind the market share, as we showed you, like Emirates or Ryanair. I mean, we can see the strong players. That's where they are. Now, the question is, are they increasing their footprint or are they shrinking their footprint? And for some of them, what has happened in the past 12 months is not necessarily going in the right direction. For others, they're actually improving. So yes, we can obviously share the same analysis with a time frame that is different than the 12 months that we've been looking at here.
Back to you, Ernie.
Thanks, Addison. Is Boeing losing ground in Europe, Antoine, or is this just an effect of Boeing's inability to deliver recently?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, Addison showed it. The market share is definitely not in favor of Boeing in Europe. I mean, we know it is an Airbus territory, but like you mentioned, Addison, I mean, on the wide body front, it's quite surprising. Now, I think that the challenge today is that we see a capacity frenzy among airlines. I mean, they're all looking for more seats. I fear that this may backfire for some of them at some point if you don't pick the right aircraft type. Maybe today capacity is good, but at the end of the day, this is not just market share that you're going after. And so you need to make sure that the customers that you have as an aircraft manufacturer are the right customers, or that it's the right tool. As I showed earlier with Icelandair, it's not necessarily, okay, they have MAX 8, but is it properly used? maybe not. I mean, I have other examples like that. I think the MAX 8 at Luxair, for instance, is not necessarily the right aircraft type. Now, MAX 8 at LOT is doing a good job. So again, I think we need to go one by one and see that in some cases, the MAX or the 787 are well used. I'm thinking also the KLM, for instance, the 787-10 at KLM is doing a very good job. The 787-9 at Virgin Atlantic is not necessarily doing a good job. So what you need, and I think, Addison, you mentioned it, I mean, to have strong customers for the long term. And just to make sure that, and yes, today Boeing is behind. Now, does it mean that the trend will be going in the same direction and their share shrinking even further? Maybe not, maybe not.
I did find one thing very interesting, and you mentioned KLM here, but it also applies to United. The 787-10 is a phenomenal airplane.
Yeah.
Its economics are stunningly good. And it's the ideal replacement for the 777-200 across the North Atlantic. And it's interesting that that particular airplane didn't pop up in your coffee.
It's just that I did not show it, Addison. But yes, there are the Dash 9, the Dash 10, sorry. And it's the same with the MAX, actually. When the MAX 10 will arrive, clearly the MAX 10 will be also, I mean, this should be a very good aircraft, and we'll see how airlines will be deploying it. Again, I think, Addison, we cannot just look at the aircraft itself on its own. It really depends on how they're using it and what's the environment. I mean, we were looking at the SAS before. The 350 is a great aircraft. The 350 at SAS is struggling, but we know that it's not necessarily, we cannot blame them. The situation in Russia doesn't make it easy for them.
Sure.
But, and it may not last forever again. So, yes, the Dash 10, I agree with you. The 787-10 can do a very good job in Europe as well. Yeah.
Antoine, do you have the capability to look at some of the alliances? We know there's the code share for each of the three major alliances going from North America to Europe, where they share revenues and profitability on those routes. Does that skew the analysis, or do we have to add those airlines together and
yes,
and get an overall picture to understand what's going on?
Yeah, there's many ways we can slice and dice the picture, and you're right. As I said at the beginning, I don't think we claim to understand everything we see, and then sometimes you need to understand what's the strategy between different players. And you're right, Addison. Between the same alliance, there is a game, and we were mentioning Lufthansa, United, Swiss, all this. They have a coordinated strategy for the transatlantic market. So yes, we could have shared those same pictures by alliances, and maybe we could understand the role of each player within alliances. Now, that being said, I think it's still interesting to see the performance of each airline individually as well. So, but we would need more than an hour.
We have another question from Savvy. Firstly, she says very kindly, very helpful presentation, by the way. Thank you. Then she goes on, was curious if you are seeing any noticeable impacts of switching away from flying to ground transport in your data, and what that might mean on a go-forward basis. I believe you pointed out the regional impact was related to that. So I guess, particularly in France, right, that's where we are seeing shrinking domestic flying.
Yes, true. So as we saw, I think so we have two kinds of operators. I mean, you have the low cost and as we showed within Europe, low costs are the only ones who can offer basically the point to point, and the train is not necessarily there to go from Germany to Spain. I mean, it's not necessarily easy. Now, the majors, this is mainly connecting traffic because actually their passengers are basically flying international. And that's where maybe trains or even buses, coaches can feed their hubs, and not necessarily planes. So I would see more of this, and we see it. I mean, Air France is already doing it. You can actually take a train and then take a flight. Same with Lufthansa. American is doing the same with the coach line. So I think we may see that happening. So maybe the market share of network carriers will shrink it's not these passengers have disappeared. There will be more. We will see them on the international market. And actually, but I'm saying that, but tell me if I'm wrong, Hugo. Actually, we're tracking also these passengers. I mean, we see in our ONDs already the one going through the train stations or where they're coming from. So we have that.
All right, we're over our 1 hour.
Well, not quite, but one more question for Antoine. Europe is much more green than the States. Can you comment on the impact of environmental pressures on the European airlines and what that means and what you've been seeing in the data?
Again, maybe not that I don't want to answer that question, but it's probably the same answer as before because there are, I would say, green alternatives like trains and buses, as I said, to feed the hubs of majors. So clearly, I mean, yes, SAF is a solution. There is technology coming up to improve the fuel efficiency of airplanes, but in the short term, I think these alternatives can be very efficient and can be implemented fairly quickly, and I would see that growing a lot. So the use of alternative solutions to feed the hubs. For low cost, it's maybe a bit more challenging, I find, because again, they want to keep their business model simple with not too many aircraft types. So if they want to add alternatives or additional aircraft in the network, that may complexify a bit their business. But it doesn't mean, as we can see, that they're passive on that front. They're also trying to maybe be more proactive with the SAF, for instance, solutions, and try to be involved in all these discussions.
Well, thank you very much. I think that probably concludes our webinar, Addison. So thank you everyone for attending. We hope it was useful, and thanks to our guests, Antoine and Hugo.
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you, Edison. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.